Welcome to our third lecture on technical writing. So far, we have seen that what is the importance of crafting an impactful story in scientific writing, and how can it make our research more impactful and more readable by the audience, and how can get how can it get us a more number of citations. And then we saw that what are the important elements in an impactful writing? What are the elements that make a story more sticky rather than slippery? Now we will see that what are the more important elements that give that give us a story a more pronounced and more organized structure. So we know that everything has a beginning and has an end. So you might say that it is an obvious thing, like if we give a pen to a monkey, he will write some gibberish on the paper, and the gibberish will have some opening, some middle ground, and an end. And you would say that it is an obvious thing for every uh, thing we write. But I say that when I meant about the structure, that it is not about the position of the text. It is about what we are writing in the structure. So opening, middle ground, and end is a very important structure that we must follow. And I will show that what are the factors that we have to put and we should emphasize in the given elements of the structure. So every story should have an opening. It should describe some challenge and what kind of actions we are taking on in order to face this challenge that we described above, and what are our resolutions. Means that how the world has changed after understanding through the action that we have performed in order to overcome the challenge. So every writing has an opening. It introduced the characters, setting, and it addresses the larger problem that we are going to solve or introduce in our paper. And in the next section, we have to describe the challenge. What are the problems that we are facing in order to solve the problem? And then we have to describe the action. What kind of actions? What are our methodology in order to overcome this challenge? And then we have a resolution. It will give the idea, the audience, that how our understanding about the world has changed by taking these steps that I have described earlier. So these four steps or these four elements are called the OCAR structure of a story. And these are very essential elements of a structure of a story. We can organize them and rearrange their you can say sequence, but these are the most important thing while writing a scientific work, or a fiction work. So we will see that how can we organize and rearrange these elements in order to get most of it out of our writing. And it depends upon in which situation we are writing. Either we are writing for a fiction work, or it is a scientific work, or it is a or is it a research proposal? So it depends upon uh, these kind of situations. So let's see the OCAR structure that we described in the previous slide. So the structure of the story depends upon the audience, the nature of the audience. Is the audience is patient enough to be engaged with a longer story, or the audience that we are addressing is very impatient and wants to get most of the reading or most of the conclusion while reading, and the audience wants to get most of it while reading as less as possible. So worker structure is most adapted by the papers or by authors who are writing the papers for very specialist journals. And it is for very patient audience. So it develops the story very slowly, and it reveals the story in a very structured manner, and you have to wait while reading how the story is unfolded. So as I said earlier, opening introduces the characters. What are the characters of our story? And it describes the background in which the characters are going to play their roles. And in the end of the opening, we tell about the main challenge, the main problem, the bigger problem we are addressing in our writing. And in the end of the opening, we address the specific goal or the specific problem that we are going to address in our writing. And then we we describe our action or our methodologies that we are going to use in order to address the challenge or in order to solve some problems. So take the example of Lord of the Rings. So in the first two chapters, you just you know you just know about what Frodo is and what all is his challenge. So in the half of the book, you will only know about the characters. What are the characters of the story, The Lord of the Rings, and what kind of challenges they are facing. So this structure is followed by most of the fiction writers, like used by the author that has written The Lord of the Rings. And it is also used by most of the scientific writers that are writing the work for the specialist journals. So this kind of structure is for the people who are patient enough to listen how the story unfolds in front of them and how the story develops the structure. So it is used for most of the journal papers and most of the fiction writers that want a longer story. Next similar structure is ABDCE structure. And this structure is most suitable for the audience that is less patient than the audience of the OCAR structure. So here A stands for the action, B stands for the background, D stands for the development, C stands for climax, and E stands for ending. So in this structure, we want the action to be our most prominent element. And we will start our story with the action. It will give the instant drama and excitement to the audience. So the audience can be engaged through the whole story. And then we describe the background in which we are taking the action. And after describing the action and the context of the action, it develops the story. And as we are developing the story, we, we come up with the climax. And the climax is the point on which we are just joining the threads of the whole story. And in the ending, we describe or give up the resolution of our story. It tells us that what kind of understanding we have gained, and or you can say that how the characters of our story has changed after all this. So this structure is mostly used by the fiction writers, classic writers, and also the science writers that are targeting the research proposals in order to engage reviewers early. So in scientific proposals, we want to excite the reviewer that is reading our research proposal in order to engage and make him excited and make him our advocate for the research grant. So ABDCE structure is similar to OCAR, but it is for less patient or more impatient audience. So here's an interesting point. We start with the opening and then we jump to the challenge and then we describe the action we are taking to overcome the challenge. And then we describe the resolution of our work. So these themes should work in cycle. In resolution, we should be talking about the beginning of a story, but from a different perspective and angle. Because in the beginning, we were talking about the problems we have, and in the climax or conclusion, we are talking about the problems we have solved. So it is more like a spiral rather than a circle. So we can describe it as this. First, we have opening, then we go through the challenge, and then we describe the action we are taking to overcome the challenge. And then we again go back to the beginning of our story, but the story has changed. So it has moved toward the resolution, the altered part of our beginning that describing how our understanding of the beginning has changed. So our research proposals or scientific writing should follow this pattern. The next is the structure for most impatient audience, and that is LD structure, often called lead development structure. So it is used most by the newspaper writers. So you may have seen that in the newspaper or on the first page of the newspaper, most of the stories are described, and some part of the story has been left behind and left intentionally, and usually has been completed in the later sections of the newspaper. So this early structure is also called the inverted hierarchy structure because first we have to lead the story. In other words, we have to tell as much as story as possible in the first few sentences of our writing, and then we develop the story in the later uh, part of our writing. So the lead comprises of the core of the story packed into the first sentences. So in the lead, we are collapsing the opening, challenge, and resolution in 1 to 2 sentences. And then we expand our lead into the development and fills out most of the detail, usually in 1 or 2 sentences. So in order to engage this audience as quickly as possible, we have to describe our opening, challenge, and resolution in as less space as possible. So the key rule is that our first sentence should be a hook for the readers. It should engage the reader immediately. So it is usually adopted by the newspaper writers because the newspapers are targeting the audience that is very less patient. The next structure is LDR structure. It is also for the more impatient audience, but the audience of this targeting this structure is more patient than the uh, audience reading or audience targeted by the ID structure. So it describes the story in lead development and resolution structure. And it is adopted by most of the writers that are writing articles for different journals that are targeting general public. So in this structure, the author has much more freedom than the LD structure, but has less freedom than the OCAR and ABDCE structure. So it is, as I said, it is mostly adopted by the author that are writing articles for the magazine. So the article should be engaging enough uh, that uh, so that the readers uh, read the whole article and see all the advertisement. That is the main purpose of the magazine. So we should hook the reader by the lead and push them inward in our story. And unlike newspaper, we have much more freedom because editors do not have that more space. And then we end our story and article with a strong resolution. So here is a brief summary of our continuum of story structures. So OCAR is the most is for the people who have most patience, and it is a very slow development of the story. And then the faster one, the faster one than the OCAR is the ABDCE structure, and it is for best patients audience. And then we have LDR structure. It is much faster than the previous one. And then we have LD structure, and it is for the most efficient structure, for the most important audience than the structure of the previous, than the bodies of the previous structures. So in the scientific writing, most of the structures that are adopted are the first three points. So OCAR is usually most adopted by the authors that are writing scientific papers for specialist journals. ABDCE structure is adopted by the authors that are writing for the generalist structures, generalist journals. And LDR is mostly adopted by the people who are writing research proposals and asking for the research grants. So you may be asking that how can we adopt these structures for our science writing, and how can we make our science writing in a manner of a storytelling in order to make it more impactful and more influential. So in scientific paper, we usually adopt author structures. We first start with an author that gives uh, the characters, the context, and the bigger problems that we are addressing in our paper. Then we describe the specific problems that we are going to address and going to face in our paper. And then we describe the actions, that is the research plan for the case of the research proposal or research, or the methodology in the research paper. And then we describe the resolution, what we have understand, and what we have understand from our work, and how our understanding about the world has changed after this work. So more specialist journals, uh, uh, most papers for specialist journals are written in the manner of OCAR structure, because the readers of uh, these journals are more patient. On the other hand, the generalist journals like Nature and Science are, 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 are the are the journals for the more impatient audience than the audience of the specialist journals. And another reason is because we adopt uh, ABDCE structure while writing for the generalist journals like Nature and Science, because the editors are the professional editors, not the professional scientists that do some side jobs as editors of the journals. So in order to hook these editors, we have to adopt more uh, thought-provoking and more exciting form of our story. So Watson and Crick DNA paper is an example of the structure adopting ABDCE structure, because it gives first the action of the story, telling what we have discovered and how it can change and revolutionize our life sciences. And then the story develops from the action and gives the resolution at the end. So while writing scientific paper, we have to consider for what kind of journal we are submitting our paper, and using this consideration, we have to consider what kind of structure we should adopt. So another writer that we usually face uh, in our careers is the research proposal. And it is for the people in academic setting, for the people that are more, that are least patient about this. So proposals are reviewed by the editors or the people that are working for the uh, research grant agencies, and these people usually read these research proposals, uh, like in airplanes, where we prefer to read novels and watch movies or sleep. So, in order to hook these reviewers, we have to write our research proposal in most exciting way. So we have to engage our reviewer who is reviewing our research proposal to open, and our opening should discuss the action that we are taking with the research proposal in a very exciting way. So reviewer may say no instantly after reading your introduction of your research proposal, or may say that maybe I can read more and let's see how the things unfold. So you should engage the audience first or the reviewer first through your opening, and then you can change his mind from maybe to yes as you develop your story in your research proposal. So most appropriate structures for research proposals are ABDCE or LDR. So next you might be thinking that in most of the paper or in many or in all papers, you may not have seen the open structure explicitly. You might have seen a similar structure also called IMRaD structure, and it pronounces or have form as introduction, methods, research, and discussions. So on the other hand, OCAR is not used explicitly, but it works as a principle and IMRaD works as a rule. So in the introduction of the paper, we usually found the opening and the background. We usually found the characters and the context of the story. And where at very end of the uh, introduction section, you will observe the challenge that the author is addressing through his research work. An action comprises of methods, results, and discussion. And in the resolution, you and the resolution you will usually find in the last part of the discussion, how our understanding about the world has changed after reading or doing this research. So OCAR is not explicit in the research, in most of the research papers, but IMRaD is you can say, the most concise form of the structure of the OCAR. So most of the sections of the OCAR or elements of the OCAR are combined in the IMRaD structure. So the whole story or the whole story structure of our paper does not change as much from the OCAR. We just name to change and make two or more elements in one of the section of the paper. So how we have to map the OCAR structure into IMRaD? So our research paper should adopt an hourglass, map, or you can say an hourglass shape First, we have to introduce the topic, its characters, and the context. And at the very end of the opening, the introduction, we have to address some specific challenges that we are going to face in the story that we are reading. And after describing the challenge, we have to run again and end up with a resolution. So you can describe it in that way. Like we are starting by with a broad problem, then we narrow down that problem to a specific challenge, and it describes our hypothesis that we are testing or questions that we are addressing, and then we further narrow down the, the hypothesis through methods and research, and we again widen it again in the discussion and resolution section by addressing that how our research work has solved the problem and for what are the implications of our research in addressing the wider problem that we described above. So the structure of the paper should be an hourglass like structure. So the key principles that in fiction, one of your one of people is profoundly changed. In science, our understanding of the world has changed. So in the characters of our story are usually our understanding in the scientific part. So most of the principles that we use in fiction can be adopted directly or indirectly while writing science. So using these structures, we can make our story more impactful according to the situation we are given for. Either we are writing for a specialist journal or journalist or generalist journal, or or we are writing for the research proposal for specific PhD position, or a, writing to a funding body. So these kind of factors can make our impact more powerful on these kind of authorities.